Have you felt the pain of having your salespeople tell you that they didn't know that a new product or feature was now available to their customers? Or perhaps you've been in a situation where your go-to-market strategy is governed by an Excel sheet with hundreds of tabs and yet another tab to keep track of all the other tabs. Now consider this. On the flip side, according to Bain's research, companies that implement launch best practices see up to 2 times faster growth than those that don't. And 81% of CMOs agree that launches make or break the long-term success of a product. So if developing and communicating your GTM strategy is a struggle, then today's episode may have some answers to your problems, as our guest has felt that pain and built a platform to solve for it. Hello and welcome to the Predictable B2B Success podcast, brought to you by Sproutwith.com. I'm Vinay Koshi, and our guest today is Karthik Suresh. Karthik, you are the co-founder of Ignition, a collaborative hub for marketing and product teams to plan, execute, and measure the go-to-market strategy side of launching. Now, you're also a product and technology leader with experience as a founder, an early startup hire, and a key player in defining product strategy and finding market fit. You've had quite an extensive set of experiences building products in consumer, enterprise, and the data domain across early stage and established companies. Just to give listeners a bit of a taste, you were previously at Facebook, where you led acquisitions for Portal as product manager for growth at Facebook Reality Labs. Before that, you built rich consumer product experiences for various trending and cultural moments, such as the Halloween NFL kickoff, Thanksgiving on the Facebook app as product manager for hashtags cultural relevance. Prior to Facebook, you were head of product at Kraft. In fact, you joined Kraft pre-seed as employee number 2, wore multiple hats, and led product and operations at the firm from 0 to 1. You've also you also founded a London-based fintech startup, Altrest, that was part of Seedcamp's 2016 cohort, and spent 6 years as VP for an algorithmic and high-frequency trading firm in New York. Karthik, a very comprehensive and varied resume, but I'm curious, was there a specific incident or event that triggered this journey towards building Ignition to what it is today?
Yeah, first of all, thanks a lot for having me on the show. I'm excited for this conversation. Yeah, absolutely. Time and again, I've seen in various companies I've worked for, there have been quite a bit of a gap between the product teams. And for example, you mentioned like sales teams, not surprised. Oh my God, is this feature already live? But I think one specific example I can think of is while I was at Facebook, I was a PM at Facebook Reality Labs, and I was helping launch a lot of the features on the devices. I forgot the exact feature. I think we were launching Oculus referrals, and it was, first of all, in a company like Facebook, there's at least like 100 to 200 people involved across product, marketing. Even in marketing, there's brand marketing, there's influencer marketing, there's customer marketing, there's product marketing, and then there's legal and privacy and policy, and obviously the execs have to sign off. So there's a huge number of stakeholders. And the go-to-market plan there was, and as you mentioned, it was basically like a Google sheet with hundreds, literally 100 tabs. And there was a tab to keep track of other tabs. And nobody knew where to find the assets. I think we even shipped the wrong logo or something. But yeah, it was because it was such a onerous process. And there was no like tool to manage that. The way they solved it there was they would like, there's a bunch of program managers who would ask everyone to join like a war room just a week before launch and just go through like a checklist and then call out people's names. Hey, this is done. Where are we? And that's just like a nightmare. And I was always thinking that there has to be a better way to solve this. And that's when I met my co-founder, Derek, who was leading product marketing at Rippling, and Ignition was born.
And I'd love to dive into that and the issues that you're trying to solve in a bit. But I'm also curious, what would you say would be, given your journey to date, would be your personal area of strength?
Yeah, it's basically the ability to take risk, right? I think the most important thing was always been, I think, a reason for my success. Also, my personal values. As people say, the only thing constant in life is change. and being able to like accept and adopt change, in fact look forward to those like the change. That's been my kind of my personal, I think, superpower and strength. And also being able to like jump ship. Like Facebook was a pretty cushy and a comfortable job, and then being able to again start a company, you leave all those amazing perks. Again, this is not the first time, it's the third startup. So time and again, like you just keep doing this because you just realize life is short and change is coming. And then rightly last year, I think 25% of people at Facebook got laid off. I think they all were probably been there for 12 years thinking like, this is my life, this is where I'm going to retire. But no. So I think the people who accept and adopt change, in fact, who look forward to change, I think it leads to like pretty fulfilling life. And at least in my life.
And what would you say in that area of strength is something that businesses don't know, but should?
Yeah, I think when you talk about large companies specifically, there's always this innovator's dilemma where what do you want to do? You have a product already in the market which is doing well. But then let's say now, for example, there's AI, which is really taking off with the GPT technology. So there's always this question about like, how do you respond? A lot of the times, because stakeholders or execs cannot agree, or there's so much, there's meetings turn meetings and meetings to discuss and align. Sometimes they miss the boat. And but then the companies who are like, for example, I know a company who was building like video transcription service, and they had fine-tuned their models for almost 3 years. But then when the new GPT technology came, that model was better. So they just threw away the 3 years of work. They're just like, no, you know what, we got to adopt this new wave. It's not just a fad, it's real, it's better. And then that's how they are doing well now, and because they already have an existing customer base who they are serving. So I think it's a huge problem if the businesses don't embrace this change. And I think that's one thing which I've seen Facebook do well as well, because the founder Mark is a CEO. But I can almost guarantee if there was a new CEO, there would be like so much like discussions and meetings and a lot of heartburn before they actually adopt change.
So change is important, but when it comes to the go-to-market side of things, would you say that even today people still view it as more of a project as opposed to an ongoing strategy that needs to be kept on top of?
Yeah, 100%. I think, and that's one of the reasons why I'm so motivated with Ignition is I think people leave a lot of money on the table by not investing in a solid go-to-market strategy and a go-to-market process in general. And even in today's world, attention is scarce. People don't watch like a 30-minute video, or everyone wants to like, and there's an explosion of tools out there. There's thousands of SaaS tools. And now with AI, it's only going to exponentially increase. Hey, how do you expect users to find you? Traditionally, like I come from a PM background, and the mindset has been you build an amazing product, the users will come. But unfortunately, that's not true. They don't. It's almost, I feel, also sometimes people are like, oh, I'm just going to send an email and that's a launch to my, or I'm going to put it on Product Hunt. That's a launch. Product Hunt, and unless you're in the top three, that's where like most products go to die. It's so important to have a solid go-to-market plan and a strategy. Just to take it a little bit further, basically, when you're thinking about go-to-market, you're thinking about, okay, first of all, who is your target audience? It's just, I'm selling to PM with more than 500 people in companies with more than 500 people in US in software space. So you be very specific. Then you think about who your competitors are, what's the market like, you do your market research. Then you think about your messaging, like how can you message your product such that this target audience actually get the value prop. Then you think about positioning, which is so important. Like, how do you position your product in the market so you stand out? There's thousands of copy generation tools. Just if you're a 1,000 copy generation tool, hey, like, how are you going to sell? How do you position it? And then, you need to think about pricing, packaging, what channel mix you're going to use, and then get all these then aligned across various stakeholders. Make sure your sales team is aware of it, your customer success team is aware of it, and the execs know that this is coming, your comms team is aware of it. And this is running this process is so critical. I was reading some stat today, even just today morning, that's like for almost people, I think especially large corporates, they leave almost 10% of their revenues on the table by not investing in a proper launch process, which is like for every billion in revenue, it's almost 100 million. It's a huge mistake and a lot of money left in the table by thinking that it's just like a small project and not like something which should be like a large scale investment in this proper go-to-market process.
You make a really good point there. But perhaps a lot of people listening to this going, why do I need a tool or a platform like Ignition when there are tools like Asana, etc., or Monday.com, etc., that we've been using for a lot of these processes? It's not ideal, but people are familiar with it. We've been making things work to date. Are there critical failures that such systems facilitate in our thinking of the go-to-market process that is detrimental to an effective launch?
Yeah, talking about the tools, that's a great question. And that's something we had to ourselves when we were building Ignition, when we were just thinking about our own go-to-market. We had to think a lot about it. But I think the fundamental play here is like all of these tools which you mentioned are like horizontal, like generic tools. It's the same like why do you need a product road mapping tool? You could still use Asana for road mapping, but why do you need Product Board or any of the road mapping tools out there? So I think there is a lot of times you do get by, but launch is more than a task list. Launch is more than a checklist. Checklist just comes at the very end of a launch process when you're executing the launch. But the whole strategy side of things, when you're planning this target audience, your positioning, your messaging, and right now it's very hard to do that in Asana or Monday or any of the generic project management tools. And moreover, even if you can set up a template, for example, let's say you have a template in your Notion or Coda, it's a static template. One thing we know as operators is launch date always moves, right? Like engineers will always give you a date. It's almost 90% guaranteed it's going to be delayed by a few weeks or a month or so. You can't just change the launch date and then change all the dependencies, all the dependencies of assets, tasks, comps. And a tool like Ignition will automatically do that for you and also generate this template in the first place. So yeah, I think and then finally, basically, I talked about the whole go-to-market plan where, there's this target audience, market research, positioning, messaging. We are also adding like AI layer, like powered by GPT to help you actually generate that plan. If you, for example, if you feed in your product requirements document, we will generate a go-to-market plan for you. So at least you have V0.1 to start off. So there's quite a few advantages and benefits of using a purpose-built tool like Ignition for your launches than a very generic project management tool.
And given your experiences with the market plans, do you find that there are perhaps one or more points of failure as they come up with these strategies and plans? If so, what are they?
Yeah, I think the number one failure, I think you alluded to that at the beginning of this podcast, is stakeholder alignment. It's the biggest failure. It's like the product team, and first of all, the product and marketing teams, they are not in sync. The way it works is usually marketing teams have a weekly call with product teams to see what's shipping, when shipping, and they just keep pinging the PMs. It's more of a pull versus a push. And the same thing happens to sales teams and customer success teams. It's like very unclear as to what's shipping, when it's shipping. And even if there is a product roadmap, it's a ship date, it's very unclear is actually that's the date when it's going to be shipped, because the engineering teams are not looking at that. The engineering teams are looking at the Jira, and they live in Jira, and then marketing teams live in Asana, and product teams live in our own road mapping tools. So all of these tools don't talk to each other. So I think the single biggest point of failure in this whole process, including the one example I mentioned at Facebook, is just stakeholder alignment. I think that's the number one failure. The second one I can think of is, I think a lot of the times you need a multi-channel approach to your launch. Just sending an email is not a launch. So sending an email to your customer is not a launch. Once you have your go-to-market strategy figured out, you need to chase your potential customers in multiple channels, and you need to hit them with email, social, Reddit, or wherever they are present in order to like actually drive home that message. And a lot of the times people don't have a very clear strategy. And then finally, I would say people don't have the consistent messaging as to how to explain your product to the users. Like I've seen so many times when there's a feature in a product, even in sales team, salesperson X is explaining that in one way, and salesperson Y is explaining that in a completely different way. And the customers are so confused, and it's just because there is no like a centralized plan where everyone can refer to and then have a consistent way of talking about things.
Brilliant. So when you were talking about alignment between the various teams, would you say that kind of also goes back to perhaps the culture within the organization and the way they operate?
Yeah, culture is definitely a big player, but I guess it also depends on the size of the company. For example, if you're an early stage startups, you're pretty much everyone, what everyone's working on. There, it's more of a lack of, I would say, knowledge, lack of a specialized like a knowledge on how to do the launch. For example, a lot of the founders come from an engineering or a product background, and they don't really understand how go-to-market processes work, and they have trouble in implementing the process. It's less of an alignment issue. But in a large company, they do have an entire dedicated teams to do that. But at the same time, as you said, it's, for example, one cultural issue I can think of is product marketing teams either report to marketing in some companies they report to product. I feel like in companies where they report to product, they're more closely aligned with the product teams on what shipping, when shipping. But when they are aligned, when they are reporting to marketing org, they might not be as aligned, and they probably focus on more on content generation, sales enablement versus actually thinking about messaging and positioning. Yeah, culture definitely plays a huge difference. Culture, reporting hierarchy, and also the founders or the management's background. If you have founders who come from a marketing background, then you have a pretty tight-knit process versus from somebody from an engineering background. Yeah, it's just all kinds of there's parameters play into this process.
So I'm curious, with a platform like yours, does it pick up on perhaps the gaps between what is and what could be?
Sorry, can you repeat the question again?
So as you were talking, I got the impression that really the issue is gaps between what is and what could be today with the various teams. And I was wondering if your platform is able to pick up on those gaps to the way you've set it up.
Yeah, 100%. That's one of the main reasons why we are building Ignition. So one, it's like basically a source of truth for every single person in the company to come to one place, and you can get all the launches happening in the company, when they are happening, and for each launch, what's the messaging, what's the positioning, what are the assets I can use, what's this data sales stack, and then if the launches are in progress, you can actually see what are the remaining items to be done, what are the dependencies, what are the blockers. It's basically like a one source of truth, like a single kind of a view across the company, across multiple product lines of all the launches happening. And then on top of it, we have a stakeholder communication layer where you can set up recurring email updates or Slack updates, where it will actually push like weekly updates on what the status of various launches is, and what's launched last week, what's launching in the future, what's launching this week, and then keep everyone in sync.
I know you're using the term launches, but would it be fair to say that it's not a once done and forget kind of thing? It's something that needs to be monitored and addressed on a regular basis, well into the future, past your initial launch date.
100%. In fact, that's a great point. A lot of the times, I feel like you do a product launch and you just go party and forget about it. There's no accountability. But the really good go-to-market teams, they have a very clear post-launch process, the launch measurement functions, trying to understand like 30, 60 day, 30, 60, 90, all the key KPIs, which they hopefully establish before the launch on the product side, on the revenue side, whether it's like number of signups, number of leads, whatever they are measuring the launch against, they can track it 30, 60, 90, do some kind of a retros after the launch so that they can actually feed the best practices into the next launch. In fact, that's a pretty big point you're making, because what happens a lot of the times is, for example, I mentioned this Google Sheet where you do the launch and you forget about it and nobody even knows where the Google Sheet lives. So you repeat the same mistakes again and again because there's no learnings, there's no retro. And then you just reinvent the whole process, reinvent the wheel. And then sometimes it's, and then, and the other thing could be like the product marketer running the launch leaves and there's a new product marketer and all their docs and links, nobody has access to that. So that's lost. So really having this in one place, it's not just about making sure that you have a really structured launch process right now, but also in the future, you can look back and see what were the learnings and what went well, what did not go well. So you can apply those learnings for your future launches.
Brilliant. But I'm also thinking that while looking at metrics and things that certainly help brings focus to people and the things that they operate on, what would you say to those who perhaps thinking It's almost as though we're reacting to the fact that we haven't quite hit our targets, our numbers, some of these metrics, and we're trying to address it through almost like diagnostic or prescriptive type solutions, when fundamentally there is an issue with culture. I don't know if you've had that experience, and if so, what would you recommend to people to address some of these fundamentals so it doesn't become an ongoing issue that kind of needs to be reacted to and addressed on an ongoing basis going forward?
So fundamental issues about launch planning.
Launch planning, but I guess more to do with the ethos of how you view your customers and stakeholders in order to get them right from the get-go, as opposed to trying to address them down the track repeatedly, sometimes in cases.
Yeah, I think the first thing which companies should do is, I think a lot, for example, all the marketing teams, the go-to-market teams, or product marketing teams, if you have a product marketing, they should be involved in the roadmap planning phase. I think the fundamental issue here is like they are informed after the product is shipped, or the product is going to be shipped in a month. And I have done the mistake. I've been a PM and I'd be like, hey, we are shipping this feature next week. Can you help with the launch? And the PMMs have flipped at me. Like, do you know it takes a lot of time to actually plan launch? I don't know. I don't think you understand the work we do, right? So I've made the mistake myself. I think the number one thing which companies can do is bring people on board right in the planning phase and the roadmap. When you're doing your roadmap for your Q1, Q2, Q3, your quarterly roadmap or your half a year, make sure they're involved. And in fact, it's not just about making sure that the launch goes well, but it's also, but they have so much additional insights about customers in the market, which you may not necessarily have. And there's probably a blind side to that. And then they will help you fill those gaps in. So there's also other advantages, like when you bring in like at least the sales and marketing leaders, hey, I really see this space really heating up. I think in the roadmap, we should prioritize it this way, instead of just purely prioritizing based on what the customer features are or the usages, which is you generally use your quantitative or qualitative data to prioritize features, but bringing them gives you a whole different perspective. So there are multiple advantages to that. So that's, I would say, the number one thing which people can do and change is make sure you involve the sales and marketing leaders right from the planning phase and not when products are ready to ship.
Would you also say that having a good distribution strategy in place from the get-go is equally important?
Yeah, I think I even take it a step further. I think the product managers, they should really think about distribution even while building the product and include some features, like, for example, how are you going to introduce virality? How are you going to introduce referrals? Like, how do you make it easy to people to refer to, even just bring other stakeholders easily onto the platform if it's a SaaS platform? Like, thinking through all of that is so critical. And a lot of the time it's all about feature, like how good the feature is, but people forget about distribution. And for me, the distribution is at least as important as a product. And a lot of the times products fail not because they're not good, but because people haven't thought about distribution. I think 100%, like making sure having this distribution strategy in play even before you start executing the product will not just ensure that you have a clear go-to-market plan on how do you launch when the product is ready to be shipped. Also, while building the product, you're building in such a way that you allow like network effects to play, kind of referrals and virality like built into the features. And that will make a huge difference for your adoption.
Brilliant. I'd also like to touch upon the messaging side of things that you mentioned earlier. What would be your advice to figuring out that positioning and messaging, and especially when you're doing a launch, so that you have a story that resonates with the audience that you're speaking to, at least the right audience that you want to speak to?
Yeah, this reminds me of a story. Somebody was telling me during, I guess this is when Obama was running for president, during the process of picking a candidate. I think Obama's campaign ran a positioning campaign where they did a word cloud of all the words which the competitors were actually talking about, and it was all the same thing, but there's nobody in this quadrant of hope or change. And they're like, okay, let's go with that. And then the rest is history, right? So that's how much of a difference it can make to your product, right? So just because you build the best product doesn't mean anything unless you have a proper way to message it to people and also position it into market so people can clearly differentiate why it's different from other competitors, why it's going to solve my problem. You really need to think about, like, for example, in this example, I said you run a word cloud, you go to all your competitors' websites and pages, see what they are talking about and how they are positioning themselves. And you find yourself a sweet spot where there's like still a high demand and pain point, but not a lot of competitors are talking about it. Then you want to go position yourself there and before you go launch.
Okay, that makes sense. There's a lot that's being said about surveying, doing the kinds of research that you talked about, websites, etc. Do you find that people are often able to have insightful conversations with actual customers or prospective customers, or is that oftentimes a bit of a sticky point?
So you've been basically talking to customers about the product usage?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think this is also a cultural thing. I've been in companies where it's a part of the culture. Every week there's one customer call who, like PMs, maybe engineering leaders, somebody from marketing, they all attend, they ask questions, they take notes, and then it's then distributed throughout the company. And there are other companies I have actually spent time where the PMs haven't spoken to a single user. It's actually very counterintuitive, but like when I was interviewing for certain product management candidates, I've seen people they've never talked to a single customer. So it's just sometimes like, I don't understand. I think it's a big cultural part of that's where the execs and the leaders in the company should make sure that this is ingrained in the culture. Just talking about, oh, we are user-driven company, we are user-driven product development doesn't mean anything unless until you have a process where you have, and also there's multiple touch points, right? So the PMs are speaking about the features, on the marketing side, they're thinking about messaging, like trying to understand like the way marketers are interviewing customers is trying to find out like how the customers explain the product in their own words so they can use it to target other customers. Whereas where the PMs are trying to figure out how they're using the features, is it solving the real pain point, what new features they can add and things like that. So it's also like multiple touch points from multiple teams, even for the same customer. And then ingraining that in the culture of the company is how you do it.
Do you have any recommendations for ensuring that this sort of thinking is brought to the fore within the culture of a company?
Yeah, so I think it's basically starts with at the very top. It also depends if it's a large company or a startup. In early stage companies, it really depends on like how founders and then the early employees, how they have built the product and what's the approach they have taken to set the culture. Obviously, in large companies, there are dedicated user research teams, right? So who do that. In fact, sometimes I feel like that might also be a con because when user research teams do the research, a lot of the times the PMs or engineers are not in that call. They're not talking to the users. They either see a recording or they see some transcripts, which is not the best way to do it. And you need to make sure you are on the call. But in early stage companies, it's all about the early founding team, how they have built the product, what culture they have set. And also what tools specifically they are using to seek feedback. For example, do they have a public feedback page, a public roadmap page? Are they making it super? Do they have an intercom or a chatbot on the side? Do they have a public, like a feedback page, a release notes page, and also the email campaigns which keep going out? Because you need multiple touch points. It's not just one. So making it really easy to make sure the customers can give you feedback, and customers will give you feedback. Customers will 100%, like people sometimes think, oh, there's nothing in for them. No, they will, but you need to make it like really easy for them. Obviously, if you want to get on a call, then, you incentivize them with Amazon gift cards, and that's a more structured process. If you want to get them on a call for 30 minutes or an hour, but just ongoing feedback on new features or bugs, it all depends on how easy you have made it for them to like just go to a site or a chat bot or wherever, different touch points to just give you those feedback. And then the last thing I would add is I've been in companies again where the whole process is set up, but the feedback just goes into some black hole. Nobody's monitoring it. So then you need dedicated customer success person or somebody who's triaging all of that and then routing it to the right teams and making sure that it gets prioritized. I'm not talking about like bug requests using Zendesk. I'm actually talking about feedback or a feature request, like I want in the product. So that's the last mile, I would say, make sure that's also set up in the company.
It's interesting because, at least in my mind, it's not so much about thinking through the tactical ways of addressing this issue and ensuring that you're able to speak to customers and understand them and serve their needs, but rather the need to increase people's empathetic potential, if I could put it that way, because if that potential increases, then people naturally find ways to solve the problem, as opposed to being prescriptive with things that have worked in the past, or being a little bit creative to solve a particular problem. Is that a topic that's even talked about very much in go-to-market circles, whether it be leadership or even amongst product managers or and other folk?
Surprisingly, again, depends on the culture of the company,
Mm-hmm.
but it's some of those things where I feel like when you're early on in the company, it does get talked about a lot. And then as the company grows and the teams grow, they get
Mm-hmm.
siloed, it disappears.
Yeah.
So that's like the tragedy
Mm-hmm.
of growth. You're doing well, you're making money, you're more customers, but then the whole customer empathy is lost. Everything becomes very prescriptive and systematized, and people are incentivized the wrong way too. Like this is like a random example. Like I was talking to a PM, and then I was like, hey, PM, like, why don't you do a better job of involving the marketing leaders in your roadmap planning and making sure you're giving them information ahead of time to help them make sure your product gets to market sooner? And this is a B2C company. And the PM was like, I am not incentivized for that. I'm not going to be given a bonus or promotion based on that. My incentive is to move the retention by 10% or increase the time spent on this app by a minute. That's my KPI. And based on that is why I know if I get my promotion or bonus. So this, as a company grows, this whole customer empathy and the passion and mission, everything kind of dilutes, and it all becomes very prescriptive based on like
Certainly.
very transactional. Yeah, that's what I've seen.
And also, to a similar vein, perhaps get your thoughts around the need to emphasize trust. Given the times that we live in, people are a little more skeptical and cautious about where they place their buy decisions, etc. What would be your thoughts around that, especially in light of things like positioning and messaging?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I think you, and also especially right now where there's less touch points, everyone's remote. I think in previously there was this, I would think there's a few different things which I want to talk about. First thing is like before there was like a person to person contact, whether even as early stage companies, we actually used to go sit with the customers. That was pre-COVID. Right now it's all a Zoom call. So there's a lot of the human elements missing. And we used to go to conferences, we used to meet in some kind of a setup, which kind of sort of like help build this trust. I'm not just a bot. I'm actually a human. I have my own personality. You can trust me. I'm not going to run away. I'm going to be there for you. But right now, everything is so automated behind all this. Now with AI, there's going to be hundreds of tools, which is going to be talking to, probably not even going to be talking to a real person. Yeah, I think then it really comes down to your history with how you have kept your commitments to date, what you have promised to the customer, how you have delivered, and how you have communicated that. And then doing that in a very kind of regular cadence. So the customer knows that, okay, I can trust you. I can depend on you for my critical business. I can basically, it's a job to be done. Like I am hiring you to solve my problem. So can I trust you? So I think there's a lot more which needs to be done on the communication side. The whole making sure there's no too much communication, in my opinion. It's more about making sure that there's multiple touch points, and if possible, if you can even meet in person and build that relationship, that's amazing. But if not, at least having this regular, frequent communications which goes out, whether it's emails or whether it's calls, and then making sure you actually stick to your commitments and also show that you have done what they asked for, I think will go a long way in building trust.
Would you say that a platform like Ignition is encouraging the development of playbooks for the go-to-market strategy side of things? Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, that's definitely a fair comment. In fact, that's how we started building Ignition. And also that also is another answer to your previous question as to how we differentiate from Asana, Monday, and other project management tools, is because we have pre-built templates. And so when you go to Ignition, when you start building a go-to-market plan, we'll ask you a bunch of questions like, who's your target segment? What's your budget? And what's your marketing strategy? Are you trying to grow in a competitive market? Are you trying to create a category? Like ask you a few questions. And based on that, we will actually custom build a template for your product, which includes like the list of the OKRs, the persona, the channels you need, the channel recommendations, and then all the assets, and then finally the checklist, the list of things you need to do in order to go to the launch. So yeah, we have quite a bit of, I would say, pre-built templates for you, and we'll customize it based on your product and the questions, answers to the questions we ask.
I'm also curious, how has this whole AI conversation of late influenced the way you're looking at your platform? And I guess looking down the track, how does it influence the way we should be thinking about go-to-market strategies, given that most of us could probably ask ChatGPT to help us come up with a broad strokes playbook that we could refine from then on?
Yeah, no, I think the GPT technology, it's definitely revolutionary. And for us, it's actually been very helpful to accelerate product development, because now what we can do is not just create a go-to-market plan for you or create a workflow for you, but actually generate that content for you, right? So it's like actually generate that messaging, taking a few questions based on who your persona is, what your product is, and we can actually generate using GPT, generating an example messaging for you, generate a positioning statement for you. And I think the whole generative AI, a generative side of the AI, is just going to be like game changing for a lot of platforms like Ignition. In fact, in the next 6 months, I can almost say with high confidence that if any platforms, they don't adopt this technology, they're going to die pretty soon. Yeah. And so there's a few different use cases here. One is obviously content generation. The second, we are actually building a chat GTM bot ourselves, where, basically like instead of going to the Ignition workspace and searching for a launch plan, searching for an asset, you can ask the chat like, hey, tell me what are the 3 upcoming launches, or give me the latest sales deck for this launch, and things like that. So I think that's pretty game changing as well. And then finally, I think it helps with onboarding, it helps with copy generation, it helps with this whole workspace search. So there's multiple use cases across the platform.
Very interesting. Karthik, I think we've covered a fair bit of ground, but would you say there's perhaps a couple of aspects to the whole go-to-market side of things that you find doesn't get talked about very much? If so, what would they be?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned a few different things about the go-to-market, but just first, the number one thing is, first, do you have a structured, repeatable process? Do you have a process which you follow for every launch? Do you have a playbook? Or is it ad hoc? You just randomly, like every launch, come up with something at the last minute? Do you have a process or not? Then two, making sure the alignment, right? It's making sure everyone's on board early on, right from sales, marketing, customer success, pretty much the whole company are aligned or in sync as to what's launching and when it's launching, and get regular updates. And then the final one is, do you really run a proper process into figuring out your messaging and positioning, so that you're not just like explaining the features, just like what the feature does, but explaining the benefit as to how you're solving the user's problem, and then all the research and thinking that goes into it. It's not like a day job. It's probably like weeks of research. So those are the things I would say is missing. And we just talked about AI. The AI is going to result in explosion of tools. And the only way you're going to like get people to use it and even know that you exist is by having a solid go-to-market strategy and a distribution strategy in place.
And to wrap things up, if you were listening to this episode, what would you say would be your top takeaway?
Yeah, the top takeaway is invest in a solid go-to-market process in your company. If it doesn't exist, make sure you talk to the leaders and executives and then get them to understand the importance of having a go-to-market process, and then start implementing it right away. And if listeners are curious and want to find out more or connect with you, where would you recommend they head to? Yeah, so the website is haveignition.com. It's HAVEIGNITION.com. And you can connect with me on LinkedIn. My handle is Karthik Suresh, LBS. Or Twitter, it's just Karthik Suresh, first name, last name. That's my handle on Twitter. So yeah, I'd love to get your feedback. Terrific. We'll include links to that in the show notes. Karthik, thank you so much for doing this. It's been brilliant. Yeah, thank you so much for having me on the show. Thank you.